I'll be presenting a case of a young child with hematemesis. The first case would be a very brief description of a 2.5-month-old male child who was born at term with a good birth weight, but he developed fever and lethargy on day 7, was diagnosed to have late onset neonatal sepsis with CRP positivity and a methicillin-resistant Staph aureus sepsis. Following a hepatomegaly, for further investigation, an ultrasound was done, which showed multiple hypoechoic space occupying lesions all throughout the liver. The child was treated with IV antibiotics. On follow-up ultrasound, it was detected that the child has developed portal vein thrombosis and was detected after 25 days of life.
Okay, so let's just wait. Can somebody tell me what is the connection that you're drawing for this, what last finding that she's just told you? What is the connection? And this case is important because the next case that I tell you, this must have happened to the next case also. We're just showing you where things are, what could be the pathogenesis of the whole thing. So just tell me this portal vein thrombosis that you see, what could be the reason for this? No, but here there's no umbilical vein catheterization. You can see. See this child. So possibly what has happened? It's just portal what? I'll take it to Dr. Thapa.
I think this is a young baby who had problems of sepsis, and as she has mentioned already, staphylococcus infection, and that was there, and there were multiple, as you can see, hypoechoic lesions occupying the, inside the liver, obviously indicating that multiple abscesses in the liver. And then following that, this baby was having this thing, portal vein thrombosis, and that could be secondary to the sepsis in this baby, because there is no mention of any umbilical sepsis or catheterization here. So only even sepsis can itself induce thrombosis of the portal vein. This we have also seen in quite a bit of.
Can you give us a word for that? Will you call it portal pyonia?
Yeah, we can say portal pyonia because there are multiple abscesses which were there in the liver. Certainly they have come from the gut itself. That means this baby started with the infection in the GI tract, and from where the things have spread to the liver through portal vein itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So next.
Following this, the child is otherwise asymptomatic, is thriving well, and is gaining a good weight gain.
Okay. I'll just take this question to Vibhor. Vibhor, this is the child, he comes to you. What would you do now from here onwards? Quickly in 1-2 sentences.
As praised, so detected it, we need to monitor whether the portal vein thrombosis, whether it remains or persists later on. Otherwise, it's asymptomatic. So, not to do really for anything for the portal vein thrombosis.
Now we have an ultrasound and we know that the portal vein is thrombosed still. It's about, the child is about 3.5 months old. So, what do we do next time?
See, it's just a portal vein thrombosis. I will look for collaterals, and if the child is 3 months, the child has not bled, so I will not do. I'll wait and watch.
Yeah, we'll wait and watch, and possibly. So, what time do you think we should be doing the first endoscopy to look at him? Or would you wait and watch for the bleed? Yes, sir.
I think even one would have thought of even giving thrombolytic therapy here, because there is a fresh thrombosis which have been seen. That's number one. Number two, of course, we know that collaterals and the potassic collaterals, they develop very fast actually, within few weeks, as early as even 1 week. Earlier brief was 3 weeks. So even endoscopy, now what is the age?
Now it's 2.5 months.
2.5 months was okay. So even if you have detected, I think one can do endoscopy very nicely. There is no problem, and to see for the.
Would you like to wait till 6 months or do it immediately?
No, even do immediately. There is no.
Do immediately or do not wait. Okay.
No, you see, when thrombosis has happened, we don't know actually. So if, as I told you, that collaterals they develop as early as 7 days, so you can do it.
Okay.
There's no harm, because if baby should not be very sick actually. That's the only thing.
No, he's not sick now. Yeah. Now the thing is that.
The point is, there is no doubt, I wanted to just add, there is biopsying this patient, that is how thrombosis takes. Second thing is, sometimes you should also see the resolution might take place. Dr. Thappa's point is very valid, that you should have tried treating this patient some kind of.
So it was given, we have not mentioned it here. Yeah.
Probably, there is no urgency to do an
months.
Come up, please just come up.
Yeah.
That might be the time. You will offer only the, what's called the primary prophylaxis.
Okay. Let's, yeah.
You see,
Yes, I think so.
Dr. Raja, I think we have to believe in, this is not for the pediatricians, but at least I am sitting in an academic institute. I will like to see if there is a thrombosis of the portal vein where the varices has developed or not, irrespective of the splenomegaly, because spleen may be, maybe smaller size. You may not
For
be able to
academic
palpate.
purposes,
So-
if we want to see the natural history.
Yeah.
See, nobody has done a prospective study to see when it actually develops. There may be a difference of opinion. That doesn't mean we are wrong. None of us
Yeah.
is wrong.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, before we go on and tell you, must tell you that the heparin was given to this baby for a prolonged time and didn't help out. Does somebody have any data here to tell us that what percentage of patients do respond to heparin, if at all you have that data? I mean, I for one will not be able to give you.
No, I cannot give you, I don't have
Yeah.
the data.
So, do you think there's any data?
No, in fact, I am also not aware
Yeah.
of the fact, but wherever we have also used in these type of babies,
Yeah.
2 months round, between 6 months or so, we were not successful at it.
Not successful. Okay, so we go on, and everybody understands why were we asking about no ascites, jaundice, bleeds, and irritability. People there will ask me and will tell me why were we asking this history. Quickly. Yes, so they can be cirrhotic or they can be a non-cirrhotic, this kind of a portal vein thrombosis. So looking at the cirrhotic or the liver disease point of view, we asked this history. Next slide.
Dr. Seema,
Yes, sir.
one comment regarding, though there was no ascites in this baby, but certainly majority of the patients who get acute thrombosis of the portal vein, ascites is invariably there to begin with. Subsequently, it may recede. Yeah.
Maybe it was missed at the center where they were being, as we was being. Okay, next one.
On examination, the child had no pylorictus. The liver was 2 centimeters below the costal margin with the normal spans, soft and rounded margins. Spleen just 1 centimeter below the costal margin and no ascites. The rest of the examination was normal.
Okay. So that's, go forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So what is this? Somebody from there, what is this? What can you see here? How do you interpret this investigation, now that you know everything? At least read and understand. So what is happening at Aarti? Go forward.
So we did an ultrasound Doppler which showed that the main portal vein was replaced by collaterals. So summarizing, this child, a 2.5-month-old child with neonatal sepsis, leading to a portal vein thrombosis and subsequently established portal cavernoma as early as 2.5 months of age. Now going from this case, I proceed to a second case, which is an 8.5-year-old boy.
What is your highlight on the first case?
So
What do you want to tell them?
Yeah, I would suggest that now that you see the second case, remember the history of the first case. Possibly what happened to the first case is what is going to happen. We may not have seen the patient at that time, but the second case possibly has had this in his infancy. So this was my way to show you what happens in infancy. What can we look for once you have patients with neonatal sepsis, especially with serious neonatal sepsis. This can be picked up, so these patients can be managed right from the beginning instead of being managed the way this second case is going to be managed. Just look at it. See, that is why that's why I did not make any final comment on it, and I just asked for any data, available of using the anticoagulants, and you know that the data is not very successful also, and the data is not enough. So I leave the question open-end. Still.
So this boy, who is 8.5-year-old, presented to us with history of recurrent massive hematemesis with postural symptoms requiring multiple PRBC transfusions. He had no history of jaundice, ascites, encephalopathy during any of these episodes, so they were all well-tolerated bleeds. And the child had been on endotherapy outside because of high-risk esophageal varices, and he has received 3 sessions of EVL before he came to us.
Can somebody tell me what is the importance of talking about postural symptoms here? If the postural symptoms are there, what is the reason? I mean, why are we even talking about it? The pediatricians. Quickly. bleed there, a GI bleed with postural symptoms tells you what?
Significant bleed.
Significant. And usually it comes with which kind of bleed?
Arterial.
Huh? Yeah, I'm asking what kind of or what etiology of bleed would be there to have postural symptoms quickly. Good. Let's go ahead.
On further history, we found that this child, even though had no history of umbilical sepsis or catheterization, he had a history of abscess on the back at live day 3, which needed an incision and drainage, and a pyoderma on the left lower limb with pus discharge at live day 45, which was conservatively managed. So whether it was at that time a staphylococcal sepsis or full-blown sepsis, we don't know, but since the child was treated with antibiotics, he improved. In rest of the history, there was no history of recurrent diarrhea with dehydration.
So what should, it's just a second, what could have been done by a pediatrician for this child when he saw a pyoderma, which was a serious sepsis at that time? What could have been done for this child, having seen the first case? So that is what, and this is what we need to keep in our mind and try to catch them earlier.
But, you see,
I'm not saying for all patients.
Just request all of you, whoever has to say anything, please take a little trouble of coming to the mics in the here so that everybody can hear. Yeah? We love that you come, but
See,
it's difficult to get to the mics.
So if it's
Yeah.
if it's a hepatobiliary infection, yes, you get an ultrasound done. But if there's an abscess on
Yeah,
the back
elsewhere,
of
yeah, on the
pyoderma on the
periphery.
lower limb, I don't think I would have asked for
No,
an
not all cases, but I think there is this thing that we must keep in mind, because I think a pyoderma somewhere may have been a little more, they could have been a sepsis which we are not possibly getting a history of. And
but
so
I think the
a
problem with
high
that-
suspicion should be kept. Yeah.
No, thing is that it's all right. You see so many times pyoderma and also staph infection and so on. Every time you're not asking for ultrasound abdomen. If there would have been a clue, for example, hepatomegaly or even splenomegaly, then one would have
So
thought
how
of
much
ERT.
data do we have to, I mean, most of the cases who are coming to us are not even giving you these kind of, they're basically idiopathic. They're not giving you, umbilical vein catheterization. So there's something somewhere is happening. So shouldn't we be now having a high suspicion and try and catch these patients a little early? This is my
No,
take
a
on it.
Question
That's
from
all.
I think
audience
it's,
here.
too much
So if
actually,
it is
then
really a
we'll be-
recommendation, can you also suggest a time frame when one should really think of doing an ultrasound abdomen? At what point of time of a neonatal sepsis? Or at what day of life or a week of life? And even if you catch up early, anyhow you're going to treat with an antibiotic
Maybe what
for a
I
neonatal
want to
sepsis.
say is a more prolonged sepsis or more prolonged, infection. That's all I have. We don't have data to say that kind of a thing as to how long how long later you should be doing it. Maybe
Incidentally,
it takes 2 weeks for this to formulate.
Incidentally, or the skin and soft tissue infections in the newborn usually will be not a long-lasting infections. So within few days of your right antibiotic, the child is anyhow going to improve.
Most of them do. But those who have a prolonged course, that's what I feel that we should keep a high suspicion, especially in a neonatal age group.
But I think by this time, Dr. Seema, you might have seen so many cases of EHPVO, and I can tell with confidence that even we might have seen more than 1,000 patients. But this type of scenario where you are saying that staph infection and then you go ahead with the ultrasound, I think it will be too much actually. Until you
Most
suspect.
of our children do not have the luxury of going to a neonatal setup where they actually, my feeling is that we are really not catching them because they're not going to those setups. So this is one thing that, I'm not saying this is,
No, this is a thought process which is going on in your mind, but it should not be, put in practice in such a way until you have a clue. For example, you
high
pick up
suspicion.
spleno.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying high suspicion.
Okay, fine.
Yes, go ahead.
On examination, he had pallor, no icterus, no clubbing, no skin bleeds, a normal facies.
Now, I'll take this question to Vibhor first. Vibhor, why are we talking about facies here? And then I'll take it to Dr. Sawant.
Why?
For the normal feces, so
Yeah.
animal.
The person who's sitting next to you, Vibhor, is responsible for me saying this here. So we'll ask Dr. Sawant to complete the list here.
I think
We
it's
dug
certain
out that 90-70 paper of yours, ma'am.
part- We do get certain congenital abnormalities, like we had one child with an absent ear, or there are children with the cholestatic liver disease who have abnormal faces. So the detailed clinical examination is required.
Okay, sir, you will.
Sometimes polydactyly, these pre-auricular tags and of the skin, all these things have been seen by us also, but we can't say with confidence.
I
that
would
they
In
are-
all our
with the
cases, we've seen
portal
just
vein
one case
thrombosis.
who had this.
Even I had seen only one.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have seen thousands of patients of
It's not very
PH,
common
right and
finding.
left.
We don't see
This is not to be emphasized actually.
Yeah,
face.
absolutely.
Okay.
I think here, Dr. Seema, one point is very, very important. Since we know that this patient is having hematemesis many times, somewhere moderate hematemesis, and then coming with the height of 19 kg and, height of 113 centimeter and weight of 19. This is something which
Very
should be highlighted. I
Yeah.
think you can ask the audience there.
Okay. So yes, Vibhor, what is your comment on this?
So definitely, this child has a failure to thrive. His growth is impaired, and it's quite a common finding in the patients with EHPU.
Okay. Can the house tell me what could be the reason for growth failure in this child?
No.
chronic bleeds.
Chronic liver disease. You see the general examination. Do you find chronic liver disease in the general examination? In the history? No, I let them answer. Otherwise, I take the question back to the. Okay, Vibhor, can you tell us as to why the growth failure happens?
So in the patients with EHPU,
Yeah.
so basically,
Use of full form of PH.
is
Yeah.
an extrahepatic portal vein obstruction.
Just portal vein obstruction.
Yeah, it's a
will
portal vein
cause-
obstruction. So the gut derived growth factors has not been taken. So it's like insulin-like growth factors. So the liver is deprived of these growth factors. Even so, and this definitely affects the growth hormone and insulin growth factor, the axis, which is responsible for the normal growth in this stage. So this is one of the major
Yeah.
factors.
So it's
Apart
the portal
from
vein,
this,
flow
also.
is stopped, and
Yeah.
that is he just told you the reason, and that causes growth failure.
So
Let's go
apart
ahead.
from this, also there are other factors like anemia. So they will have a n number of times
Associated,
to do
yeah.
it. So it will affect the growth.
Repeated-
Plus there can be a big spleen. So it can cause like a decrease in the intake because there can be it will compress the stomach and the gastric capacity will be less. So these are also the other factors.
And also nutrition person.
So yeah, other thing is that
Your own study, which has been recently
Yeah.
published on the malabsorption aspect. Is
yeah, it's a
very good
portal
study on
hypertensive
APJ.
enteropathy.
Why
So
not support that?
yeah. So also this all the patients with portal hypertension, they will have villus at blunting and the absorption will decrease. So there is an increase in permeability. So that is also one of the important
So
factors.
now, to sum up, it's the portal vein flow is decreased, the factors, the insulin-like growth factors are not there, the fact that there can be portal vein villus atrophy, and finally you also have, what did you say in the end was anemia, associated
Yeah,
anemia in
yeah,
these
I
patients.
think, additional-
Can be responsible for all these factors responsible
I
for
think
growth.
in addition to whatever has been said,
Yeah.
we should not forget so many times metamesis, hospitalization
Yeah.
for weeks together, off the diet and so on. All these factors should
Yeah,
also
yeah.
be contributory.
However, it may not be present in 100% of the cases. It is seen in 50 to 60% of the patients of EH, portal vein thrombosis.
What I
Okay.
feel is portal vein thrombosis when they have so many recurrent episodes of bleeds. Once their bleeds are tackled and once their varices are thrombosed and their nutrition is improved, usually they get a growth spurt after their bleeds are controlled.
Yeah.
In many
So
of the
that-
patients.
Yes. Go ahead.
On examination, there were no dilated veins on the abdomen or back. Liver was just palpable below the costal margin with a normal span. Spleen was 9 centimeters below costal margin. There was no evidence of free fluid.
Okay, so we'll go ahead because
So there
lack
was-
of time, yeah.
There was no stigmata of chronic liver disease. In summary, the child had massive, well-tolerated upper GI bleed with splenomegaly with no stigmata of chronic liver disease. So we considered it a varicose bleed with portal hypertension. The next question is whether it is a cirrhotic or a non-cirrhotic portal hypertension. We considered a possibility of non-cirrhotic portal hypertension in view of a normal liver span, absence of jaundice, absence of decompensation with any of the bleeds, absence of dilated vein, and growth failure which can be present in these cases. On the other hand, cirrhotic was unlikely because of all these factors. Growth failure is a common thing between the two, but in the absence of jaundice, decompensation, shrunken liver, or a firm irregular liver, we considered a possibility of non-cirrhotic portal hypertension. Now, when we look at the causes of portal hypertension, they can either be extrahepatic or intrahepatic. In extrahepatic, we have the portal vein obstruction. In intrahepatic, the pre-sinusoidal, sinusoidal, and post-sinusoidal causes are there. The pre-sinusoidal are still considered under non-cirrhotic portal hypertension, which includes congenital hepatic fibrosis and non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis. So in our case, the child had portal vein obstruction, and hence the child had non-cirrhotic portal hypertension.
Okay. Now, can somebody quickly from this group tell me what are the various possibilities we'll have to consider once we say that this is non-cirrhotic portal hypertension? Okay, I'll take this thing back to Vibhor. Vibhor, will you like to just name them? That's all.
So for children with this age group, the most important is portal vein thrombosis, what we call as extrahepatic portal vein obstruction.
Say this loudly because EHPV is written, so
So extrahepatic portal vein obstruction. So that is the most important cause.
The next is?
So other causes like intrahepatic but non-cirrhotic, where the liver synthetic function is good. So a congenital hepatic fibrosis, non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis. So this will be the other important causes, and also Budd-Chiari syndrome in the initial phase.
Okay. So now I think these are the three largely the possibilities. We'll go a little bit too much if we go to Budd-Chiari. So we are keeping these three possibilities. Quickly, just tell us how to differentiate between the three.
In extrahepatic portal vein obstruction, the most common age of presentation is around 7 to 8 years. They have a normal liver span with splenomegaly, and the first bleed usually comes by the end of the first decade.
So would you, just wait, so would you tell us that how would be a non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis different from extrahepatic portal vein obstruction?
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
In case of extrahepatic portal vein obstruction, obviously what you have is in this patient also, liver will not be palpable. Maybe if it is palpable, just palpable. And up to 2 centimeter liver has been reported in 10% of the patients of extrahepatic portal vein obstruction. There will be splenomegaly. If you look at the non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis, there also you will have a just palpable liver, or sometimes...
Age group, sir.
Yeah, age group usually during second decade of life, in non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis, but the splenomegaly will be huge one actually. Though here also it is 9 centimeters, there usually it's more than actually
and the bleeds
bigger than
and
that.
The bleeds.
And usually they manifest will bleed. But if you look at the pediatric data of NCPA from our center, 50% had bled. Whereas in case of adulthood, I mean, whatever reports we have, 90% had bled. But they have a massive
But the
splenomegaly.
bleed that happened in this child right from 4 years or 5 years onwards.
That sort of phenomena you will not see in case of non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis.
Okay.
Now looking at the congenital hepatic fibrosis again, here the liver will be somewhere of moderate size, big liver, which will be hard in consistency, and especially in majority patients, left lobe will be quite big. So therefore, this is the only point which can distinguish between the two situations, and it will be quite irregular and so on. So that's a big liver actually, hard big liver, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can we go ahead?
Sometimes congenital hepatic fibrosis is associated with what is called as Caroli's disease. So you may get accompaniment of
Caroli's syndrome actually.
I mean, trying to keep away, we're just thinking of only portal hypertension and keeping it here. Yes, sir.
See, actually, your DD basically in Indian situations, I would say 99%, 95% should be your EHPV.
Extrahepatic portal vein obstruction.
NCPF is not a disease below 10 years of age.
Yeah.
So we would not consider here in 8.5 years of age. They are very small proportions beyond 10 years of age. The frequency is very, very low. Therefore, to pediatricians, we tell EHPV or EHPV and
EHPV. I agree with sir completely. So it is extrahepatic portal vein obstruction again.
I think there's a question. Yes.
Yeah.
Many of the time in the NICU, we do put an umbilical catheter in newborns and they have sepsis. Could you enlighten us that what is the risk of getting an extrahepatic?
Yeah, you will get to hear this in the next 2 slides.
Okay, and also portal cavernomas.
You'll get to know the percentage also which has been mentioned. Yeah, go ahead.
Just one thing, I think there's some confusion. What is EHPV or what is portal cavernoma? So somebody may just explain that.
Okay. So would you like to do it or should I do it?
Now,
Okay, when you talk of EHPVO, you're basically talking of extrahepatic portal vein obstruction. Once the portal vein obstruction has happened, there will be collaterals trying to bypass that obstruction. And those collaterals, a bunch of them together, would be called as portal cavernoma. So this is what is portal cavernoma all about. Okay, so go ahead.
So in our case, the most likely possibility was extrahepatic portal vein obstruction. We went ahead with the lab investigations. Hemogram showed a total leukocyte count of 3,400 and a platelet count of
Okay, now
90,000.
just quickly somebody tell me what is happening to the blood counts. Quickly. We don't have enough time to complete the... Huh? So why is it happening?
Hypersplenism.
Hypersplenism. And after that, the next is the the LFTs that you can see. Do you think there's anything going wrong there? Huh? Is there anything going wrong there? Everything, is there anything going wrong there?
Preserved synthetic.
No. So can we go ahead now without thinking of a liver disease here? Go forward.
So since the child had normal synthetic liver functions and the further workup for chronic liver disease was not mandated and was not carried on further, we did a first investigation as ultrasound abdomen, which showed a liver 11 centimeter and normal echo texture and a main portal vein replaced by portal cavernoma with a splenomegaly of 18 centimeters.
Okay, so is that what we were looking for or something else that you need to see here? Okay, let's go ahead.
what's the... actually, Seema, what was the size of the splenic vein? Because
I
that's
think
not
they have
the-
hypertransfused this child because I wouldn't like my hemoglobin of the child to be more than 10 because the more blood you transfusion, there should be no overzealous blood transfusions in the setting of EHPVO because it raises the portal
We will
pressure.
go to that, ma'am, in a slide. Okay,
No,
can
but
we go
what-
forward so we
no.
don't have time?
No, splenic vein size.
So it
very
was
well-
normal. We didn't find it to be dilated or anything. It was normal. Go ahead.
Further investigation on a follow-up showed that the child persisted to have severe hypersplenism
Okay, let's go ahead. We already know this.
and a growth failure which was continuing.
We know this, yes.
We went ahead and did magnetic resonance imaging, which showed early changes of early portal biliopathy in the form of central intrahepatic bile duct dilatation and presence of multiple collaterals. This was even after multiple
Okay.
sessions of
Just to clear up what is biliopathy is, once you have a portal cavernoma or we just mentioned, which is there in the porta hepatis, you would find that it would be pressing over and there'd be compression of the biliary channels. And would Vibhor tell us as to what will happen to the biliary channels there?
See, because there are the collaterals, they will compress this common bile duct, and so there will be a functional the bile flow will be obstructed. So there will be a little bit of dilatation.
Okay.
Yeah,
And-
can I?
Yes.
I think you understand the portal vein, the hepatic artery, CBD, common bile duct. They are going together actually towards the liver. And once there is a portal cavernoma, what will happen? Lot of vessels, unnamed vessels, they open up. A leash of vessels open up, and they are going in the direction of the even towards the CBD actually. Around the CBD, a gallbladder.
Just 2 minutes,
So-
we'll
Now,
complete
why
it.
did we do imaging? Because here the liver function test was normal. I'll not go ahead with this advanced imaging.
So it's not
I-
required.
It's not
for this
required, I
case.
feel, at this stage.
Can I explain after
Yeah, yeah,
one more slide
yeah,
as to why we did it? Like, go forward.
when we look at the varicose status, in January 2014, for the first time, the child had a EVL with
Go
large
forward, go
varices.
forward, yes.
But even after 1.5 years of endotherapy, the child still had low-risk varices.
Go forward.
So, to decide for the further management of child in view of hypersplenism with massive splenomegaly, growth failure, failure of eradication of esophageal varices, and a remote location of residence of the child, we decided to go for a proximal splenorenal shunt with splenectomy for the management of the child. Because of the shunt surgery which was anticipated, we did a prothrombotic workup which came out to be negative.
Go forward. I'm not discussing this at this time.
After the shunt surgery, the child's hypersplenism improved. The child had no recurrence of bleed. The esophageal varices were eradicated on the next endoscopy, and the child had been gaining weight and height adequately.
Okay, before we go to the key messages, just one question.
They have disappeared.
Disappeared.
Following the shunt.
Yeah.
Eradication is following and
Fall for endoscopy. Yeah. Okay, just before we go on to the key messages, just because this is meant to be a emergency, do you have a slide on that? Okay, so we just go to the slide for the emergencies. If this child had come to you with this kind of a bleed, what should have been done? That is what we are discussing in this. Yes, go forward. So the first thing that we would do is what resuscitation, Vibhor, what resuscitation we'll be doing and what precautions we'll be taking at that time. This child has come to you for a bleed. Or maybe has gone to one of the pediatricians here for a bleed, with a bleed. Yeah.
So when the patient come to me and the parents give the history, there is a large bleed. First, I will see the patient status. What is a mental status, and there is any signs of hypotension and the sensorium. If the patient we are suspecting of liver disease, then also I like to see whether it because they will need antibiotic prophylaxis. So for the resuscitation, first is a good 2-bore IV lines, and with the normal saline, the fluid volume should be given.
What precaution would you like to do? Tell the house here about both blood transfusion as well as for fluid resuscitation. Quickly.
Yeah, obviously I'm coming to it. So, and also I need to monitor like how much is the ongoing the bleed is going on, and also I'll start him on the PPI because we don't know what's the etiology of the bleed. So
just one sentence on the cautions in the fluid management first.
So the target should be between 7 to 8, should not hypertransfuse.
Target of hemoglobin.
Yeah, it should be 7 to 9. So it's not be
So
more
it
than
should be
10. So giving it more, yeah. So
overzealous
if we give more transfusion and it bleeds, so there's a more chances of the recurrence of the bleed once it
Yeah.
stops.
Don't overflow or overflood the.
So in this case, the HB was 10.4. Probably it's the same what you're saying. Probably
Yeah.
is a more transfusion was given. That was required first.
What we are saying is that this child has come as a very still bleed to one of the pediatricians here. So no overzealous blood transfusion and fluid resuscitation. Next slide, quickly.
The next would be control of acute bleeding, which initially would include a pharmacotherapy with either octreotide or other somatostatin analogs like vasopressin. Once the child is hemodynamically stable, we should go for an early endotherapy, and the needle to scope time is approximately 6 hours after the hemodynamic instability. If the bleed is not yet controlled, we should go for maneuvers like Senstake and Blackmore tube, which can which can stop an acute bleeding. If a refractory bleed, it as a radical measure, we go in for tips.
Okay. So that's it. We'll stop at this slide itself. Just sir want to add something to this slide,
Yeah,
madam?
vasopressin. Why vasopressin? Yeah.
Forget no vasopressin.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Octreotide is enough. I
Yeah,
think.
octreotide.
This slide has been, picked up yesterday. So the sense taken Blackmore tube. So how often do you need that in your patients?
If you're asking me?
Yeah.
I think it's very, very unusual now to, use this SB tube, especially in a situation where you are doing either endoscopy. Endoscopy means EST or EVL. If you have a avulsion, patient is bleeding there and then on table, then you have to use SB tube to block it and, control the bleed. Otherwise, very rarely, even for last 5-6 years, we have not used SB tube actually.
So do you use it very often?
No.
SB tube, I think, where is my
Yes, sir.
without a man standing without a turban. Yeah, that's right.
Abha, we started with 30 minutes.
SB tube actually it has gone out of fashion. But I would tell you in endoscopy suites,
Yeah.
I think particularly for young infants who come even at 4 months of age, 8 months of age with bleed, I think all those people who are doing endoscopy in these children, they will realize that younger children actually have got large varices.
Yes.
They have got more of red color signs, and the moment you put in the cyclotherapy needle, very rarely you may have a torrential bleed, you cannot control, you can't see anything, SB tube is required. So in our own hospital, in our own institute, we have kept SB tube right in the endoscopy, and a lot of my trainees will tell you who have been trained from there. Second thing is, very rarely you may use it otherwise. I think in the periphery, those who don't have these facilities, one is octreotide you should use, always, in the bleed. Irrespective of whatever the etiology may be, octreotide should be used till the time the patient is actually referred to the good center. Second thing is, SB tube may be still required in those situations. So, and there is a pediatric SB tube, not the adult one. Pediatric and actually the volumes and other things are different. how the inflation
150.
has been made. So that is the story.
Just tell them what is an SB tube, so quickly. Oh, ma'am.
Sang is taken
Abba
blood.
can tell them.
Abba, you participate now. Tell us SB tube.
Yeah, so basically SB tube has two balloons. It has a gastric balloon and an esophageal balloon. It's like a Ryle's tube, but a thicker Ryle's tube with two balloons. And basically we put it in like a Ryle's tube. It can be put through the nose or through the mouth. And you inflate the gastric balloon and pull it up and put a weight of 2 pounds. The idea being that the flow of varices is from below upwards, so you are obliterating the varices right from where they start. I agree with Dr. Yacha. Actually, I got up to say that there are situations when the bleed is so torrential that you put in a scope, you can't see anything. And that is a situation where even in tertiary care centers, we sometimes do need a SB tube. We keep one in the ICU and we keep one in our endoscopy suite.
Okay.
90% of the time, with proper resuscitation and pharmacotherapy, the bleeding subsides. So in periphery, it is very essential that these
Octreotide.
children are resuscitated properly, start on octreotide, and then transfer. There is no point
Okay.
in just like...
So the take-home message, if you see the second line, the UV catheterization and the sepsis is independently present in 9% of the EHP view. So this is all that you have in data.
Just a message that in developing country, extrahepatic portal vein obstruction is the most common cause of portal hypertension and upper gastrointestinal bleed in children. The commonest presentation is well-tolerated episodes of variceal bleed with splenomegaly. Features of portal hypertension with preserved synthetic function, presence of cavernoma Doppler is all what is required for the diagnosis. Even after extensive workup, around 70% of the cases still remain idiopathic. Thank you.